Hi all. So this is going to be a video essay, especially promoting the question of, in regards to responsible conduct of research and research compliance. Maybe we need to question, do we really need a culture of compliance, or do we need another mindset to really make that effective? So the argument for today is I'm going to explore what it means to have a culture of compliance and also maybe give space to the idea that in addition to the culture of compliance, maybe we need to reframe that. I'm not even oh, I am recording. Maybe we need to reframe that to have it as a culture of ethics versus the language of a culture of compliance. So where this comes from, within the RCR worlds, the responsible conduct for research worlds, regulatory compliance officials, and even Office of Research and Integrity places, we commonly hear that in order to mitigate the effects of misconduct and unethical research, we probably need to create a culture of compliance. And so, what compliance means, it's essentially following the policies and procedures created by the institution and other governing bodies that oversee research regulations. And really, in sitting with that, that's something we commonly hear in conferences, but begs the question is this the most effective way? As we know, we can all list a litany of issues and problems that still occur over at our universities and other research organizations. And what has become apparent too is what we're seeing is commonly when we have some sort of issue, just recently at many conferences, ChatGPT was brought up, and there was concern of how that could impact research misconduct. We tend to have the first mindset of creating some sort of regulations, some sort of policy in place to essentially have some sort of consequence of individuals engaged in that. And that's a very linear type of thinking. And Senge, who wrote The Fifth Discipline, kind of disagreed with that sort of thinking. It creates almost these negative kind of archetypes that may arise that promotes an ineffective organization. And so that type of thinking also too creates an atmosphere where we have an us versus them mentality. Many times we hear from an IRB in regulatory compliance that researchers don't appreciate the bureaucracy, the box checking they have to go through, and many times kind of do not understand why these regulations or policies exist and see it more as a burden than what it's intended for, which is to assist in the protection of human and other living subjects. In addition to the mindset is also formed that we constantly hear at these conferences and meetings and conversations of, well, we're always dealing with bad apples in our organization. And again, that creates kind of an us versus them mentality. And I really want to kind of give space to really kind of sit with this idea of what it means to be in a culture of compliance and try to extend it to emerge that we should really be striving for a culture of ethics. So, in using Peter Senge's work, uh, Senge talks about how when we're developing a vision for an organization that is, especially an organization that's motivated to learn and progress and really to flourish, that we have to somehow foster a sense of vision, a vision that's seen throughout the organization from many different levels, not just leadership or officials with authority and power, but everyone involved. And we need to foster that vision. And so, again, when we look at RCR, when we look at IRB, IACUC, and other regulatory elements of research, we do have a vision that correct research, the research that is not unethical, that research that complies with the appropriate policies and procedures is conducted in place. And however, though, just the structure that we have with these institutions exists because those standards don't always get met. And then we have checks and balances with this. And so maybe we need to strive for a different type of vision because the current vision seems to be promoting a level of compliance. And typically that compliance is we have researchers complete some sort of RCR training and they receive some sort of certificate. And so many times these trainings, depending on our institutions, excuse me, are through some sort of web-based protocol where they log in, they watch some modules or read some text, and then they're quizzed and questioned on some multiple choice answer. They get a certain score, then they are now get the certificate that they've done their training, and now they can conduct the research. And so, again, this compliance is okay, it's a bureaucratic system where individuals just have to check boxes, follow some sort of standards, and have some sort of minimal effort in order to comply with what they're being requested from the organization. And really, what Senge talks about, in directly quoting from page 205, the the committed person, or excuse me, not the committed person, that someone who is engaging in compliance. No, hold on. So what we want to go from is, rather than being in a culture of compliance, we want a culture where we're fostering the sense of commitment to these ethical principles of responsible conduct. And so, to quote from Senge from 205, what this would look like from the individual level is the committed person is going to bring an energy of passion and excitement that cannot be generated by someone who is only compliant. And we've all dealt with those compliant individuals. They're not always the best at feeling happy about those requirements. I'm sure all the times we send those email reminders to complete those trainings and we get gruff stares and kind of moans about it, but they still comply with those requirements. And instead, what if we had a culture where people felt committed and understood the passion, the purpose of these requirements? And really, I think it comes down for not just us as an institution, but there needs to be a larger systemic change of how do we address and create those cultures of ethics, and really understanding and exploring the mindsets that we utilize. So essentially, rather than seeing an us versus them mentality, maybe we can promote a more collaborative mentality, that the role of the IRB, in addition to protecting human subjects, is also possibly to assist that the research that is conducted reaches this highest potential that it possibly could. Now, granted, I know IRBs, we tend to really try to sit with this gray area of what does it mean, or what is our role when it comes to explicitly addressing the research methodologies of certain protocols. Now, granted, that is for a different talk or a different video. But one thing to understand too is we know the ethical responsibility of human subject protection. And growingly, there's also this bigger talk, not just in IRBs, but large research institutions, of we have a responsibility to engage in appropriate research, because of if when a research has been dealt with misconduct, that has significant impact on public trust. And we see that, especially in the United States right now. There is a mistrust of many different types of disciplines that engage in research in universities, going from humanities, gender studies, the social sciences, all the way to public health and biomedicine. There is this level, and even I should even add environmental research and climate research. There is a level of distrust from the public about research. And so we also have the responsibility to do this. That's where the collaborative piece comes into play. Rather than seeing IRBs and researchers and other regulatory elements and research staff as adversaries, we can work as an ecosystem and go from an I thinking that we're both separate unities at a university to more a we thinking that we are just different branches of a tree with the same roots, and that really we need to work together in order to assure that the research that is being conducted has reaches a level of standards that meets its potential, has a positive impact or whatever's discovered, and keeps in mind finding a way to promote public trust rather than the distrust of research that is conducted at universities and other organizations. So really that is the vision that we have, is collaboratively working together to create the best type of research protocols that are out there. And with that too, that's the vision, and maybe we can sell that vision and get more individuals committed to that. Now, in shifting gears, we know that each institution is going to vary on how our culture of ethics, especially related to research, is going to be expressed. And we really need to stress that uniqueness. In addition to, we're in a great place that allows the cultural elements entering the research process. As we know from an IRB standpoint, there has been, understandably so, more concern that the IRB may not do the best job in accepting other models of science and research methods, particularly when it becomes into indigenous cultures. Now that's growing, and there's been, again, a lot of criticism that there's also been some work to incorporate various different type of ethical models when assessing research protocols and giving that flexibility with this. Just recently, there was an article in Nature about an Indigenous scholar's experience with the IRB, and what came up with that was that negative experience has an impact, possibly, and this author made the point that it significantly does have an impact, not only on furthering Indigenous research, but also establishing Indigenous scholars' careers, because as we know, just the mechanism is that research is a big component of that. And so the IRB, unfortunately, in some institutions, has become a barrier to various scholars' work, as well as their own career progress and impact on their chosen communities and the communities that they work with and the communities that they come from. So with that too, we have a great opportunity to expand and to focus on what it means to have a culture of ethics and including other ethical models. Just with the IRB, we tend to use models that, one, have been really impacted from the 1950s and the events of World War II. In addition to that, classic kind of philosophical models that were predominantly created in Europe and from a predominant European perspective. And so again, we have opportunities to improve on that element and that culture piece. So with that, what we have now is possibly using some learning organizational models to promote and change how we affect our culture, and going from the mindset of a culture of compliance to a culture of ethics. So what I'm going to do now is talk more about possible strategies that we could implement at our institutions to begin the process of promoting that culture of ethics. So in using a presenting workbook developed by Jaworski and colleagues, particularly Adam Kahane, I believe, and Otto Schremer, we can take this methods of developing an emerging culture of ethics using theory U framework in the U process in particular. And so essentially the one starting element of this is convincing a leadership lab. And so what this means is our roles as regulatory officials and IRB members and other research compliance administrators and staff members, we have an opportunity to explore how we can build that culture of ethics. And essentially, one part of that is by creating a leadership lab. And one way to start the leadership lab is understanding the current culture and conducting kind of what they call generative interviews. So the first step of this would be identify initial participants. So we can develop a list of possible people at our university, at a research institution, and maybe even expanding of that, of key individuals who we believe are essentially for moving the system towards a better future. In fact, because we want to create a culture of ethics, it may very behoove us to look outside of the university, to look at community stakeholders and even research participants to be included in this dialogue. And so we conclude anyone who feels may be a sponsor of this project or has important input on this project or who may even be impacted by this project. And what's really important is to be clear that we want to include not just people with formal power and authority, but people from every element and corner that is impacted by this initiative. And with that, what we're going to do with these interviews is really try to understand their kind of perception of what the current culture is, and how any thoughts or ideas or what emerges of what it could be. And so, from a logistics standpoint, ideally, what they recommend from a theory U standpoint is these interviews can be a couple hours long, but reality, I want to give some flexibility that it really depends on the people we're interviewing. And again, we to really promote that flexibility, I think comes into that culture of ethics. It may be helpful to find places that individuals feel more relaxed and comfortable to interview them. Could be over the telephone, could be through Zoom, it could even be surveys. But when using surveys, you still want to find a way to go deep into the process and understanding of the culture that currently is and the culture that we want to emerge. So we can develop some sample questions that we're looking for, what would this culture of ethics look like? How do we get people to be committed and have the passion to develop the most impactful research possible? How do we further that acceptance of other perspectives and diversity inclusion? How do we make the research process more accessible? How do we make our results more accessible? And how do we address and prevent further mistrust of the research process? Now, through this whole thing, it can be very important to connect with our own intention. And so I think in addition to whatever sample questions that we create, it may be beneficial for us to answer those questions or have an idea of those questions for ourselves. And so before we even do these interviews, it can be important to give some space, some sort of mental space, some sort of mindfulness meditation, and visualize ourselves as a potential instrument to emerge this culture of ethics coming forward. And so we want to be really deeply centered, relaxed, and open to embracing whatever emerges during the dialogue and the interviews. And really, we have to remind ourselves to not be reactive. There's a potential that there's going to be some criticisms of the current role we play in this culture of compliance, and that is understandable. We have to remind ourselves what our goal is. Our goal is to get to the next stage from a culture of compliance to our culture of ethics. And having that image in mind may help us be less reactive and more open to what is being expressed. So that comes into play too, that in order to allow this culture of ethics to kind of emerge, we need to build a container for it to flourish. And through this, I think what can be helpful is we may need to be more transparent in our process of what it looks like in really promoting research ethics and promoting and being compliant with these research compliances. And so that transparency piece may be helpful in being transparent on why do we want to kind of create this culture shift. Again, from my perspective, is there's a lot of criticism of our current ways of being when it comes to how we conduct ethics related to research and the compliantary bureaucratic nature of it. And again, with that criticism, this is a good time to really sit with it and possibly shift our culture of how it's currently initiated. And so, with that, what's going to be really important is creating some sort of psychological safety, some sort of climate of safety to allow those dialogues and collaborations to occur and really for that culture of ethics to emerge. And so, it's really, like, in addition to trying to change this culture, we also kind of really need to transform ourselves. And in my own experience too, is it's very easy to have that us versus them mindset. That mindset, while research misconduct is really only occurs by bad apples, and there's nothing you can do about bad apples. Well, in fact, we really need to question how do we play into influencing those bad apples from engaging in misconduct in the first place. Is our current system actually fuels that behavior? And really sitting with those uncomfortable questions is how do we ourselves play into those roles? And what can be helpful too for ourselves and as well as the people we're interviewing to allow this culture to come into place is inviting personal histories. And really, I think this is going to be important in creating that culture of ethics is a lot of our research mindset is very separate from the human, right? And we focus a lot on logic and ethics from a logical, rational standpoint, and just really objectifies and disconnects and separates our subjects. We break them down into little pieces and we kind of sometimes lose the human element of this. I think in fostering a culture of ethics gives us an opportunity to bring back the human side of research, not just for social sciences, but for all sciences and incorporating humanities for this as well. Again, this is not a completely new mindset. As we know, we've in the past have had STEAM initiatives, which is the integration of science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And as we know too, there's been a growing movement that I talked about as well as incorporating indigenous ethics and indigenous research methods into more common practice. And many of those methods and ethics have this holistic perspective of this systems thinking per se. And it could be absolutely encourageable to incorporate those system thinkings. And part of that is giving space to how this current culture of compliance impacts us on an individual and collective human level. And so really we just need to give space and hear those stories that emerge. And this allows us to possibly really understand the impact our current culture of compliance or the deep structures we have in those systems that may be impacting the outcomes that are currently arising. So in addition to that too, what's very common whenever we do kind of organizational research or reviews of our institutions, we develop these projects, we conduct the interviews, we do the data analysis, and then boom, we move on to something, some other issue, and the report always gets stuck on the shelf. I think, and again, in fostering this culture of ethics, we need to give space to the idea that this is going to be a continuation process. This is going to be a cyclical process rather than a linear process. And so that this, in addition to that, this culture of ethics is not going to possibly have an endpoint. Compliance has an endpoint. It's either whether or not someone did this or did not do this, right? It's easy to have that training completed or not completed. There is an endpoint. The culture of ethics is always going to have to being fostered, to being nurtured, to be reflected upon, to be debriefed upon, and to be constantly modified and change. And again, that's the mindset we're going to have to shift from to a more growth mindset, or I shouldn't say growth mindset, a more nurturing mindset rather than a compliant mindset. So that's a part to get started and really giving space to what emerges from that. We really want to have input from other community members of how we can promote a culture of ethics when it comes to research rather than a culture of compliance. In addition to this, too, this initiative may also work its way up to having some sort of impact on even how research is regulated from a federal, national, and state level. So, With that too, we really want to have input from as many stakeholders that are impacted of this. We want to give space to the ideas that are emerging and understanding this. So some of those ideas may be critical to what the current system is, and that's okay because the current system probably is not as working as much as we would like it to. And so this gives us an opportunity to foster a new emergent system. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.